Bienvenidos una vez más a IESA. Nos complace presentar hoy en la conferencia el futuro de la industria petrolera a la luz de la transición energética a cargo de nuestro ponente invitado Moshiri, aprovechando la oportunidad para agradecerle el haber aceptado la invitación para compartir con nosotros esta información en la tarde de hoy. Gracias. Saludamos a nuestros estudiantes, profesores e invitados especiales que ya se encuentran conectados a esta conferencia. Les recordamos que la conferencia será realizada en el idioma inglés y la sesión de preguntas y respuestas será acompañada por el profesor Juan Sabo, coordinador de esta actividad. A continuación, Juan Sabo nos va a presentar la trayectoria de nuestro ponente Moshiri para luego dar inicio a la ponencia. Adelante, Juan.
Bueno, buenas tardes a todos. Y yo me uno a María Estela para darle la bienvenida tanto a los estudiantes como a los profesores como a los invitados especiales a esta sesión que tenemos dentro del seno del diplomado de formación de gerentes de la industria petrolera y petroquímica. Nuestro invitado de hoy, a quien conozco personalmente, Amos Moshiri, es ingeniero petrolero con grado de ingeniero y maestría de la Universidad de Tulsa como ingeniero petrolero. Y él tiene una larga y muy meritoria trayectoria en la empresa, la mega empresa Chevron, donde comenzó en New Orleans, Luisiana, en el año 78. Él fue después transferido a Chevron Overseas en Gran Bretaña, donde estuvo en posiciones gerenciales de exploración y producción que controlaban las actividades de Chevron en el Mar del Norte. En 1997 fue designado gerente general de planificación estratégica de la empresa Chevron Overseas, que evaluaba y veía todas las actividades y desarrollo de todos los negocios nuevos de Chevron. En 2000 regresó a la casa matriz, la corporación, en las áreas de actividades aguas arriba, exploración y producción, encargado de esas actividades y también asesorando al vicechairman de la corporación. El año siguiente fue designado director ejecutivo de la unidad de negocios de toda Latinoamérica, donde estaba encargado de los países Argentina, Brasil, Colombia, México, Trinidad y Tobago y Venezuela, con sede en Venezuela. En el 2008 fue promovido a CEO o presidente de Chevron Latinoamérica y África, posición que desempeñó hasta que se jubiló de la empresa. Actualmente formó una empresa de petróleo y gas y es su presidente y CEO y se llama Amos Global Energy. Es una empresa petrolera independiente y una especie de fondo de inversiones con interés en participar en diferentes partes, pero muy especialmente, y lo que a nosotros nos concierne, de participar en la recuperación de la industria petrolera venezolana. Ali nos va a hablar del futuro de la industria petrolera a la luz de la transición energética, que es un tema importantísimo y fundamental, bueno, para el mundo energético y especialmente para Venezuela. Y él va a hablar en general del mundo, pero me dijo antes de comenzar esta presentación que él lo va a aterrizar dentro del significado de lo que este proceso tiene en Venezuela, en la economía de Venezuela y en el desarrollo futuro de Venezuela. Entonces, la otra cosa que quiero decir, que Ali sí habla español porque tuvo años, pero que como este tema es tan delicado en cuanto a su interpretación, pues vamos a escucharlo en inglés para que sea más preciso y su interpretación no dé lugar a dudas. En todo caso, las preguntas ustedes después lo pueden hacer en español. Ali está muy ligado a Venezuela al punto de que sus esposas e hijos son venezolanos. Entonces, con esa introducción, pues dejo con ustedes a Lee y estaré de vuelta en la sesión de pregunta y respuesta. Adelante, Lee. Muchas gracias por estar con nosotros y aceptar la invitación.
Gracias, Juan, María, para la introducción. Permítame hablar en inglés. This is a great opportunity for me to talk about the changes that's happening in our industry and why it's important for Venezuela. Venezuela has been and continue to be exporter of energy, oil and gas. It's been going on for many decades. It's going to continue for many decades. Therefore, we need to start thinking about what's happening globally, build our strategy locally, and trying to build our activity locally as well. We need to make sure to monetize the resources in Venezuela in the timely manner. But the changes are happening. Supply and demand is going to be a key driver on the success. Therefore, I want to talk to you a little bit about what's going on globally. There has been a lot of talk about climate change, talk about green energy, energy transition. You have seen some of those from the investment point of view. Therefore, I covered that. Then I tied back into what do we see the future of Venezuela and how we can monetize the large resources Venezuela got and be able to put it in the content of the energy transition. Okay, let me see how I can. Okay. Very quickly, global energy transition is moving to the zero emission. That's basically less carbon going into the air. And this is called the energy transition to the green energy. An impact, they believe, is that too much carbon gone into the atmosphere and create a climate change, and this continue to be there. There has been a trend since the last 100 years when the global industry kind of boomed, that we've seen the continuous growth in the carbon emission. Therefore, by doing that, looking at that factor, there has been some challenges came to our industry to reduce the carbon footprint that our industry creates. And based on that, what the future look like? What we're going to do with the large resources. If you recall it, a few years ago, we were talking about running out of oil. Now, resources are in the ground, and we are talking about how to monetize it. We talk about investment, the idea of the climate change, talking about zero emission, carbon emission, what kind of impact it's going to have in the investors and the view of investors investing in the oil and gas sector or petroleum sector in general. We talk a little bit about in this kind of climate that Venezuela needs funding, financing, and also market for the supply, how the economy of the Venezuela can recover as we're moving forward. My company has done an extensive modeling on balance of payment and looking at Venezuela economy and how the oil sector can help to recover the economy. This is a very complicated modeling. We've been working on it for a couple of years, and our intention has been to try to demonstrate that Venezuela has still got the capacity to get the financing and get the oil production back on track and be able to create the GDP that is required for economic growth. The key messages that I'm going to leave with you, and I would like for you to take great attention to it, is achieving 1.5 Celsius temperature increase, which is a target that's saying we're going to control the production of the carbon base to make sure global temperature doesn't increase 1.5 degrees by 2050. We still, if that happened, 40 million barrels a day oil production is required to meet the global energy. Therefore, oil is not going to disappear. It's not going to go away under any circumstances. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what are those scenarios look like. U.S. petroleum industry will be underfunded. If you recall it, a couple of years ago, we were talking about U.S. production is going to continue to increase. Permian is going to drive it. Unconventional is going to drive it. U.S. is going to be energy independent and so forth. We believe that under the scenarios that we have looked at it, actually U.S. production going to decline due to the lack of funding and due to lack of the policy and politics that play in the United States and in Europe. We believe that we believe that Venezuela economy can be recovered very rapidly through the oil sector, and it's going to be fundamental. But we've got to put that one within the content of energy transition, and we're going to talk about that one. We believe no matter what, Venezuela has been a great player in providing the global energy, and I think it's going to continue. I think it's going to continue even beyond 2050, and I'm going to show some of the information on that one. Venezuela is also very attractive. When you come in, where we're going to get that 40 million barrels a day by 2050, we believe that Venezuela is going to be one of the top producer because of the requirement that global energy has for the type of crude that Venezuela has. We believe that private and public partnership in Venezuela is going to be a fundamental for developing the economy. And that is start from the oil sector. And we talk about some of the next step that we're going to take. Let me start by talking about climate change. I'm sure you guys heard about Paris Accord, the Paris Agreement that was put together about 2015 by 196 countries, including Venezuela. They agreed to address the climate change. And the climate change really put it fundamentally talking about global warming and impact on climate, impact on some of the severe weather and so forth that we have seen it. We are not going to debate it whether or not the theory is right or should we address it different way. We assume that that's a reality. We've got to deal with it, and those changes are going to happen. Let's figure out what impact it's going to have in our industry. The chart on the upper right-hand side you see is show how the carbon emission has been growing. I mean that it has been increasing significantly. The reason for that is because global population is increasing, demand for energy is increasing. Therefore, that creates a carbon footprint much larger than it was before. Now, what they are talking about, how we can reduce that, because the belief is that that has an impact on climate change, and some of those climate change has been impacted everyone and need to be addressed. Therefore, taking those carbon emission and convert it into the temperature and setting a target at 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius, there has been several predictions what is going to have an impact on the oil production. The chart on the lower hand side, which actually source of it was BP, but we have looked at many of them. And there is a tremendous variation there and different scenarios. If you look at this, if we want to go to the net zero, that basically the balance would be by other means of the carbon base, the production would be somewhere around 20 million barrels a day. Under scenario that, yes, it's going to work on, we're going to work on it, we're going to reduce it, that basically we believe it more realistic, is going to go down to 80 million barrels a day from where we are at 100 million. Therefore, no matter what, there's going to be a substitution for the oil, for the carbon-based fuel. And that carbon-based fuel, we're going to talk about it, where it's going to come from. Therefore, the reality is there would be declining in the oil demand as we move into the future. But when that peak going to start? We believe we haven't reached the peak yet. A lot of people believe that we already reached, we passed it, and we're going to see decline. We believe that that's not the case. We haven't seen the peak. We're going to see the peak in next decade or so. But those are the scenarios that we are working on it. This is a reality. This is a reality that all the countries are working on it. They have this in front of them and trying to develop a plan to make sure that happens. Now, this is a little bit busy chart, but this is a protocol for greenhouse gas. And you're going to say, well, why are we talking about this? What relevance this has to the oil and gas and Venezuela? Well, this is a protocol that the bank, the financial institution, the government looking at it. Therefore, if you are a government or you're a company, you need to make sure those protocols are followed and at least addressed in your plan. Therefore, this protocol divided into 3 different scopes: scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. We believe that scope 1, which again, it talk about direct emission. That's basically the thing that company can do directly to reduce the carbon footprint. You know, converting the cars into the electric car, reducing the footprints of the operation and so forth. And that's, you can see on the chart on the right-hand side, got the upstream, downstream, and some of the scope 3, it governs both of them. The scope 2 is indirect emission, basically talking about the product that you create that generate electricity. We need to reduce that footprint. That basically talking about, you know, going into the green energy or doing other things. But we believe some of those things can achieve through scope 1. For example, some of the upstream activity, especially in Venezuela, can use a mixed energy. What we produce in air, all our pumps can be run on solar. Or some of the activity that we do in the operation, we can do a CCS, basically injecting carbon back into the ground. We know we are doing that in some of the areas, which is the natural gas, but we do have a technology in Venezuela. We have the ability to do it by injecting CO2 back into the ground. And some of those could be improved the recovery. The scope 3, which is the most difficult one, and I think that's what it's going to delay the 2050 target, is really governs everything else. Indirect emission, that basically completely reducing the footprint. And that's what I think is going to be a challenge going to the net zero. But have that in mind when we talk about our industry. A lot of people are going to ask, what is your greenhouse gas protocol? Therefore, we got to know this is a standard that is established. This is what it's been discussed. These are what some of the investors would ask. And since we are in the forefront, my company, of raising money for oil and gas, we just demonstrate that our company really following some of all of these protocols. Now, IEA net zero by 2050, demonstrating here. If you look at the chart on the right-hand side, 2020 demand, the chart on the bar on the left-hand side, it shows energy demand, how much of it is from the basically energy coming from the direct oil and gas, and energy demand that is coming from other sources. On the supply side, it shows how much of it is coming from OPEC, how much of it is coming from non-OPEC. You can see that blue part will shrink significantly as we move to the right-hand side. And this is what we believe, that if you're taking a scenario by 2050, global energy only need 20 million barrels of oil, which we believe that's the really worst scenario, actually best scenario if you're aiming for the net zero. Is still majority of the production is coming from OPEC nation. If you look at the green part of it, the green part, even by IEA, is Venezuela's share. Venezuela's share is not going to change. Why? By 2050, 70% of the oil that is going to be used under that scenario, you got to look at the multiple scenario because there is not one that everybody follow or believe in. There are multiple. But the IEA is saying 70% of the oil that is going to be used in the future is going to be mainly on the chemical feedstock. It's going to be used for non-combustible. And if you look at it, Venezuela is a country that got a diverse crude. Venezuela got such a diverse crude that be able to meet that requirement. And if you look at OPEC share of the supply, which is today is around 37%, would grow to 52% by 2050. And we believe that Venezuela should take 10% of the OPEC market share. It has been in the past, it should continue to be in the future. Therefore, when you look at it, Venezuela's advantage in this scenario that put by IEA, and you can see it in this chart saying, really as we move towards 2050, a country like Venezuela and the crude type and the resources they have more favorable to meet the market than any other place. And again, one of the things that is very critical, and you have seen this trend in the investment, the blue part, which is a non-OPEC investment, has been shrinking significantly. If you look at some of the company, they have reduced the capital expenditure by more than 50%. Sure, part of it is due to COVID, part of it is due to demand, but part of it to the investors' pressure to reduce the investment from carbon-based to the non-carbon-based and green. Now, we're going to talk about non-OPEC producers. As you can see, European company jumpstart on this. They are shifting, they're talking about it, that they are moving more and more into the green energy space. Part of that is due to the policy, politics, and responding to the local investors. They're moving in that direction. They're moving day to day, trying to demonstrate to the investor that's going to be the case. We're seeing more and more as some of the company completely planning to exit out of the carbon-based industry. At least that's what they are saying. But I personally believe they won't. They would have a mixed energies business, but they're still going to participate on some of the activities in the carbon-based, especially oil and gas. Now, how do they going to sell that to the investors? Is going to be based on the protocol that I mentioned. That they're going to have a less carbon footprint. They're going to demonstrate that how they bring that mixed energy into the producing oil and gas, and how they're going to follow the demand curve. The American company, large American company, Chevron and Exxon, they have a long-term strategy. They are more systematic, and they are really focusing on the long term and paying a lot of attention to the demand for providing affordable energy for global economic growth. I encourage you to visit Chevron website. They've got a very nice documentation talking about how this transition going to move. They're responding to the policy. They're responding to the regulation and all that in a much more practical matter than I believe the European company. I think the economic on the renewable, on green energy is still highly questionable. And I think the US-based company are trying to balance that and developing a short-term, long-term strategy that really follow lots of factor in it rather than responding to the today's headline. Now, if you look at the United States as an example, because really This direction is Europe and United States. United States, if you take the overall energy demand, there has been a transition. The renewable is playing a bigger role every day. The economy of the renewable is still out there. Is it competitive? But again, the trade-off in argument is that should be on the side, and you got to look at it, what is the impact this has on the environment and so forth. Therefore, you got to balance that. That's the reason you get a lot of help and subsidy and easier funding from institutional, financial institution and so forth. But if you look at it today, the mixes is still there, huge from the petroleum side, from coal and nuclear. But we believe if you look at the chart on the left-hand side, the substitute is not going to be immediately oil or gas. It's going to be coal. As you can see, the coal is going to continue to reduce and to the level that I think it would be substituted, not necessarily by oil, but by natural gas. This is a direction that US is going. I think the opportunity for renewable is going to be there, but it's at much faster pace than IEA or EIA or others believe globally we're going to get there. Therefore, I think the future of the oil and gas, at least for next couple of decades, is going to be at the same level as it is today, and it's going to be continue to be important part of the affordable energy. Now, if you look at US production, this wasn't 20 years ago, this was a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, and as well as the energy transition becoming a forefront of the discussion on the energy, everybody was expecting US production going to continue to grow and is going to be very much substituting for some of the other production. COVID had a definitely impact on that. But when you look at this curve, we believe actually US production is going to continue to decline. Partially is due to the regulation and policy. The permitting going to be slow. The other one, investment. Most of the development in the United States is done by private capital. Private capital, it didn't get a significant return on the investment. That was one of the factors. The second factor is uncertainty about how it's going to be look like, the investment going to be look like in the future. And also diversification of energy companies. They are moving into where there is more help from the government on subsidy and other factors that be able to move the investment forward. For our belief is that the US production is going to decline, not necessarily from resource point of view, but from investment point of view. Now, when you look at the OPEC, OPEC is going to be in the driver's seat. A lot of people may think that wasn't really a good comment to make, but I really do believe that. I think energy transition, as I show on the earlier chart, is going to leave a lot of headroom for OPEC to rethink about how to build the capacity to meet the future energy demand. Because if you don't create that capacity, OPEC nation going to deal with the high oil prices, and it's going to have a high oil prices impact on the global economy. Therefore, they are the one going to be back on the driver's seat, trying to balance supply, demand, and prices. If you look at this, the OPEC continue to increase the capacity. Some of these countries has the capacity to even go beyond 33 million barrels a day that today they are capable of producing. One of the countries that has a tremendous capacity to increase back to where it was is Venezuela. And I think one of the factors that it comes in, can Venezuela move in that space and meet all the energy transition requirement to get there? And our belief is yes. But right now, the market share of Venezuelan crude can be and should be increased to about 10% of the OPEC. Oil demand and reaction. If you look at the oil demand was continued to grow right pre-COVID, about 100 million barrels a day. We believe by 2022, we are getting back to 100 million barrels a day. And our belief is after that, for next 10 years, the demand is going to increase by 500,000 barrels a day per year to get to the peak demand, that after that, we're going to see some impact from the growth that we've seen on the green energy start reducing the demand. But remember, the reduction in the investment in non-OPEC already started. We're going to see that effect of reduction in their production much, much earlier than 2030. Therefore, that's the question is out there. If that happens, what's going to happen to the oil prices and what's going to happen to the supply equation? And this is what I call the yellow flag that we need to consider it as we march ahead. How far we want to pull back on the investment in the oil and gas and make sure we do have a safety net in case we need to have more supply. Otherwise, the price is going to be an issue. The price is going to have an economic impact, global economic impact, and so forth. For that space that's going to happen is going to be a critical point. We've got to make sure we don't create a perfect storm and suddenly figure out there are too many variables in here that we've got to deal with. OPEC respond quickly by increasing the supply. They can do it up to a certain point. They can do it up to about 35 million barrels a day production. But OPEC is not going to build extra capacity. The countries that got to build and bring the capacity back up is going to be Venezuela. Venezuela is going to be in the forefront to be able to increase that capacity. I think it's going to be a key player in that. Now, if you look at this chart on the right-hand side, it shows where the production is coming from. And as you can see, our belief is United States production has been flattened. We're going to see actually reduction as less investment is going to go into the Permian. And as we can see, most of the investment is going to go towards the green energy and a strategy change in some of the company. But in next short term, as I pointed out, the belief is that we're going to get back to 100 million barrels a day, and we're going to grow at a slower pace. On the chart on the right-hand side, as I pointed out, the question is, where is going to be the peak oil? We don't, lot of folks talking about that peak oil already happened. We are going down. We believe that is not happened. It hasn't happened. It's probably going to happen somewhere in next decade or so. Or that is our belief. And under this scenario, actually by 2050, if you look at it, we believe the pace is going to be much slower to go to the zero emission. And if that's happened, the demand is going to be somewhere around 80 million. At the 80 million demand in 2050, there's going to be a shortage of supply. And that's the big puzzle that is sits out there. Do we respond to 20? Do we respond to 80? And our view is, if you look at it, you better plan for 80 rather than plan for 20. And under both circumstances, as I pointed out earlier, Venezuela is going to be in good shape because Venezuela has a footprint of the quality of the oil and the capacity and cost benefit that can compete in that market, regardless of whether or not it's 20 or 80. But have that in mind and don't let the concern over energy transition to be a part of decision-making in how to move the petroleum sector in Venezuela. Need to consider it from the carbon base and the footprint and the protocol. But for supply point of view, I don't think necessity is going to have a significant impact at all on Venezuela future production. Now, let me tie everything back into what's going to happen in Venezuela and how we see Venezuela would be embedded into the energy transition. If you look at this, Venezuela is blessed by having the resources, oil and gas on the top, petrochemical, refinery, all the capacity, and met that requirement up to this point. Infrastructure. And also, Venezuela has the green energy resources to meet the energy transition. Therefore, Venezuela is in the perfect position to provide the mixed energy supply and meet the demand locally, regionally, and globally. We do have a hydro in Venezuela. God knows we got a lot of sun, a lot of wind. Therefore, how do you integrate all this to respond to the current demand and be able to meet the future energy and build a strong economy? Let's start by talking about Venezuela petroleum sector. Venezuela is well situated to take the leadership, talk about energy transition, but act to developing the resources and implement the protocol. I really do believe Venezuela is in that situation and would be able to articulate it. Not articulate it like Venezuela of 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Talk about Venezuela of the future, the Venezuela that could be a strong footprint and example for others, because Venezuela has all the resources, as I pointed out in previous view graph. If you look at the chart on the upper right-hand side, Venezuela got multiple petroleum basins, light oil, heavy oil, extra heavy oil, bitumen, gas. I remember in 2000, Venezuela started an initiative called the Gas Initiative. Within a matter of few years, over 30 TCF of gas was discovered. Sometimes I talk about Venezuela is unexplored country. But when you look at this map, you can superimpose all those green energy right on top of it. There can be windfall in many places in Venezuela. Solar can be part of it, and it can complement what we are doing. Venezuela also got a large infrastructure across upstream, midstream, and downstream. It's close to the market. It's close to the biggest market, United States, and close to Europe. And also regionally close to Colombia, Panama, and others. They be able to export even green energy to some of these countries. And part of the green energy is not just the solar and wind. We're talking about hydrogen. We do have a capacity to create that. Why? We got access to natural gas. Well, that is the picture that it's got to be on our forefront, that we can overlap the green energy right on top of the carbon-based resources. The other thing, if you look at the chart on the lower right-hand side, has the largest resource base, bigger than Saudi Arabia. We need to monetize that. We need to build that as part of the economy of Venezuela. We don't want to produce oil and gas just for sake of producing oil and gas. That's got to be converted into the economy that create the GDP and be able to move the country forward. We believe that Venezuela can be, for many decades, having a sustainable supply of 2.5 to 3 million barrels. Under every scenario we look at it, under energy transition and 1.5 degree temperature, Venezuela production share and market share would be 2.5 to 3 million barrels a day, which is quite a bit. And I'm going to show in our modeling what kind of impact it has on the economy of the Venezuela. Now, sorry. Now, you're going to say, well, if you look at Venezuela, where are we going to get the production? If the chart on the upper right-hand side shows the Faja projects, those projects can jump and start the production. We can use the new technology, not to build more upgrader. We have tested that technology. That technology exists, that we be able to convert in situ from the heavy oil into the synthetic oil. There are ability to be able to do that. Venezuela got one of the lowest costs of development and operating costs. The break-even price for Venezuela is somewhere around $20. Operation are relatively easy. We are not talking about deep water, ultra deep water. The infrastructure is there. The footprint of the infrastructure is there. It can be expanded, it can be repaired, and we can build on that one. Private and public funds are going to participate. Believe my company that spent a few years on raising funds for petroleum sector in Venezuela has been successful. A lot of investors are willing to come back to Venezuela, invest in the petroleum sector. The reason for that is because it has the ability to be able to move forward. And the way that we demonstrated, we can coexist what we are producing with the requirement for transition and meeting the guideline of the zero emission. It would create significant job, direct, indirect. And like I mentioned, we definitely can minimize the footprint in our operation. For example, all of the upgrader in Faja create a pet coke. We can eliminate that with the technology. We'll be able to run most of the operation or all operation on the green energy. That has been tested. Technology is available. And we'll be able to create a green energy operation. We can be an example of that. Being close to the market, be able to create that environment is very easy. And I think investors do see that opportunity to be there. Now let's talk about the modeling that we have, why we believe Venezuela oil sector is the key to the economy recovery of Venezuela. If you look at the chart on the right-hand side, upper right-hand side, the GDP of the country was directly related to the oil revenue, completely. And it makes a lot of sense. That's the natural resources that had to be monetized. And respond was about 69 to 97% of the total export was petroleum product or the raw material of the petroleum sector. If you look at the chart on the lower hand side, you see the red part. The production didn't decline because of resources. It was really declined due to the sanction on PDVSA and so forth. Reactivating that and taking to the back to the historical production level, it requires investment. It requires investors that we can present how Venezuela going to fit into the future of energy transition. And I think it can come back very quickly and respond via moderate investment at the beginning and continue with that throughout the next couple of decades. Venezuela has a low cost of development. Break-even is around $20, as I mentioned before. Actually, after Saudi Arabia and Iran, but it could be in part even with Saudi Arabia and Iran if you model it differently than usually looking at it just the resource-based side of it. The reason for that is because if you include the transportation, we are much closer to the largest market and to the largest infrastructure on the refinery and so forth in the United States. And Venezuela got the largest resource base. Therefore, we got all the elements in here to fill that red part of that chart. And when we do that, the GDP, which is an economic indicator, would respond very positively to that, as I show you in the following charts. Our modeling really divided this into the three sectors. We said that we're going to have a first wave of 0 to 3 years, that the production get to somewhere around 1.2 to 1.5 million barrels. If that happened, if you look at the GDP is going to grow by a factor of 3. Just if we get it to 1.2 million barrels a day production. We believe the second wave is going to get it production to 2 million barrels a day. It would be achievable even somewhere between 4 to 6 years. We think that can be accelerated, depends on the human resources capacity and capability. If that happened, the GDP is going to be $166 billion from 37, almost 5-fold increase. This is how we believe that the oil sector of Venezuela can have a tremendous impact and jumpstart the economy of the Venezuela. And beyond that, just assuming a steady of 2.5 million barrels a day under different scenario that will be pointed out for the 2050, that we believe Venezuela contribution going to be 2.5 million barrels a day. The GDP is going to be $245 billion. And the direct foreign investment is indicated in here, the first phase, 13, 14, and $64 billion. We did extensive modeling, very complicated on balance of payment. And what you see as a summary in here is just an overview of how significant oil sector is in Venezuela and how we can articulate to others that we can coexist by moving in the right direction and transitioning to the green energy while we are monetizing the resources and how we can improve the economy. This chart showing the investment, foreign investment that built into our model that is required to come in to be able to create that GDP or the production. The phase one, about 12 billion. The following phase is indicated in the chart on the right-hand side. If you look at the lower part of the chart on the right-hand side, there are three curves. If you assume that the debt stay constant, by increasing the production, you can see how the debt to GDP trend comes down significantly. And how debt to export impacted. Basically saying that at $50 oil price, this is modeled at $50 oil price, the economy of Venezuela can be improved significantly and become one of the leaders or the leader in Latin America by getting the oil production back in. Now, as part of our modeling that we have done, we assume that 2% of the revenue from oil is going to go towards green energy. And they will build a green fund that by 2027 would have $1.5 billion to be able to implement green energy as part of the plan for transition into the future. As I pointed out, we assume $50 flat oil prices. And when you look at the chart on the right-hand side, it demonstrates flattened production at 2010 at 2.5 million barrels a day. How much foreign investment is required to come into the country? And these are all tied back into the concept that we'll be able to improve the operation to efficiency and utilizing some of the implementation of the new technology, such as not building any more upgrader, utilizing gas injection, usually and utilizing CCS, basically injecting CO2 back into the ground, and so forth, creating an environment that is very attractive to the investor to come and invest into Venezuela. That is doable. We have tested the market. They believe in initiatives that you can build and be able to implement it. Have that in mind. Everything that we said in Venezuela relatively is easy operation. It's a land access. It's not offshore. You don't have to build a facility offshore. You don't have to deal with the complexity that comes with the deep water and all that. We believe that this plan that we presented of coexistence will create a strong economy as we move forward. Again, have that in mind. We assume $50 oil prices. If you're trying to model this one above that, it really create an environment that is very, very attractive, even at any time in the history of Venezuela. Now, Venezuela can become regional green energy leader. One of the area is requirement for electricity. Currently, 60% it comes from hydro. We believe actually electricity can become 100% green energy in Venezuela. Absolutely has everything that is needed to be able to do that. Or it can be a hybrid, as it happened in Texas. Texas, people don't recognize as it's recognized as oil and gas state, actually provide more green energy than any other state in the United States. And if you look at the chart on the right-hand side, that's exactly the path that we can follow. We do have the ability to build green energy in Venezuela at any point, at any place in the country. Whether or not it's wind, solar, it would be able to meet the almost 90 to 100% of the local energy. Now you're going to say, why do we want to do that? That gives us a headroom to be able to export more oil, be able to export more. And also when you look at it on the cost benefit, much better to use the green energy to provide the electricity locally and be able to capitalize on export. That would be helping the economy as well. If you look at the renewable that would play a significant role in Venezuela, it's going to be up to how you were able to convert transition from the funding from hydrocarbon base into the green energy. That's the reason we put down that 2% as part of the commitment in the green fund that be able to get us there. Conclusion, the climate change focus is a reality and need to be addressed. Honestly, there are so many debates about this. Nobody's going to win. It's a reality. Policymakers going to put target, banks, institution going to put restriction, protocol that we need to follow. When I said we, OPEC, non-OPEC producers all got to follow. Otherwise, the funding is not going to be there. It would be much more difficult. Therefore, it's reality, and we need to address it, and we got to demonstrate how we are moving in that direction, but at the same time, keep an eye on global energy demand. European has started very early. They are in the forefront, and they've done it through the regulatory and investment. It's pretty difficult to fund any project in the petroleum sector in Europe. Actually, I think I may say so is impossible. US moving in that direction. Some of the large institutions, IMF, World Bank, IDB, they're very reluctant to provide the funding for petroleum-based sector, unless it's an infrastructure and others. The 2050 target for net zero carbon emission is not doable. the global economy continue to depend on the petroleum side of it. We don't recognize when you're talking about emission, net zero, you're not talking about US and Europe. You're talking about global. When you look at the global, 40% of the world population today is using wood and solid fuel for cooking. And over 750 million people globally have no access to electricity. 750 million means population of the United States and Europe. They don't have access. And global population continue to grow. But you got to put those into the equation. We're going to find out that we're going to depend on multiple sources of energy to be able to meet that requirement. Well, some of the things got to be addressed globally, and I think we're going to recognize that has to become at recognizing that petroleum and petroleum products are going to play a significant role for many decades to come. Most of the energy companies are responding to the policymaker, and they're following the Paris Agreement. They're under pressure to do that, and they're going to cut back on the investment. Some of them already start doing it. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. We believe Venezuela is best situation. It has all the elements to be able to create a mixed energy that is required for the future and be a leader in Latin America in energy production. We really believe in that. Again, as I pointed out, it has all the resources to be able to do it. It can create the human resources capacity to deliver that. With that, I'll leave you with this. Future energy mix, the demand is going to be there. Venezuela could be in the center of that to be able to provide that supply, whether or not it's locally, regionally, or globally. Those are my comments. I stop in here and be glad to answer any questions.
Ali, muchas gracias por una muy completa presentación y me alegro mucho que tu mensaje fundamental respalde el optimismo que muchos de nosotros tenemos en la recuperación energética del país y de la economía en general. Y también me alegra mucho que hiciste un punto en el tema de la transición energética, que realmente el mundo lo que tiene que hacer es resolver el trilema energético de tener acceso a energía a costos que son accesibles a todo el mundo y no solamente cumplir con las necesidades o las recomendaciones ambientales. Entonces, bueno, estamos muy agradecidos por tu presentación muy completa y entonces vamos a invitar a María Estela para que vea las preguntas que se están formulando en el chat.
Gracias, Juan. Comenzamos entonces con la sesión de preguntas y respuestas. La primera pregunta la formula Rodrigo Guerrero. Dice, thank you, Mr. Ali. I have two questions. As a foreign investor, what are the conditions besides sanctions do you need to start investing in Venezuela? Do you think that Venezuela could have a great development in LNG technology in the next years?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Venezuela, I think, got all the fundamentals in place. If the sanctions are lifted, I believe the investment would come in. I'm hoping our company would be the first one to come in. And we do have a capacity to invest significant amount through the private and public partnership. We have created a fund, and we are in the process of creating the second fund for Venezuela. Therefore, as soon as sanctions are lifted, I think the opportunity is going to be there, no doubt about it. You got to recognize Venezuela is only 3 hours away from the United States, largest market, the technology, the human resources capacity, all those can be shared. Regarding LNG, actually our plan was to build an LNG plant in the state of Sucre via Plataforma del Tano many years ago. Right now, Venezuela got significant amount of gas, and those gas need to be monetized. The resources in La Perla is significant. I heard they estimate somewhere around 13 TCF of gas. Current technology in LNG is also significantly improved, and you'll be able to construct some of those plants at much lower cost than it was in the past. But to answer your question, be quite honest, Venezuela creates so much opportunity in the petroleum sector. You got to prioritize what you want to do first. From my point of view, the first prioritization for us is to capitalize and monetize Faja and bring the Faja project back to the standards that meet the requirements that we have today. I'm so excited about current technology. For example, we can do a CCS in Faja. We can demonstrate to everyone that we'll be able to do that. But again, just summarizing my answer to your question is, yes, LNG is viable for Venezuela. Is it doable? Absolutely. Investment will come back immediately to Venezuela if the sanctions are lifted. Venezuela doesn't need handout from IMF or World Bank, needs support from him, but Venezuela is very capable, and Venezuelans are very capable to get the economy back on track and be a leader in Latin America, just as its own. And as I pointed out, our modeling show we get the production going to 1.5 million barrels a day at $50 oil price. We're going to have $100 billion GDP. And beyond that, it's going to look great. And like I said, our modeling is not superficial, it's very extensive, and we believe in that.
Thanks. Carlos Peñalver hace la siguiente pregunta. Total and Equinor recently divested their asset in Petrocedeño. They justify the decision partially to carbon reduction strategy, but of course, political and economical situation play a major role. What do you think of the decision in terms of the operation of those companies in the country?
You know, every company make their own decision based on shareholder strategy they got, and I'm not in the position to comment on their decision. I can comment on would be a substitute for them. I said the answer is yes. Therefore, I won't worry about a couple of companies leaving. I think there are a lot of companies standing in line to come in. I think the private capital bring money, bring funding, bring the technology, to bring the support that needs to develop some of that resources. Be quite honest, reducing the carbon footprint, it can be implemented in Faja project. I developed one of them, and I know what we can do differently to significantly reduce it. And I think in the future project, we're going to do that one from day one. I mean, that if you look at some of the project, for example, Chevron has developed in Australia. They're working on significantly reducing the carbon footprint. They got several LNG plants. Technology is there, they are doing it. That can be implemented in Venezuela as well. Therefore, the decision is their decision. What I want to encourage you, don't let that to disappoint you, because as an investor, I'm sitting on the sideline and like to come in. Therefore, there are many like us sitting there want to come in, and there's other companies that they are committed to stay. And I'm not going to mention one of them. There will be others coming in.
Thank you. The next question, how can private investors participate in your second fund?
Private investors are, I think we're going to see more and more of that coming in. private investors are looking for investment opportunity. And I still believe that despite of what you see today about energy transition, the oil price are $67. It's very attractive. It provides the good return. And investors are looking for a good return, but they're looking for the good return with the responsible operator, with the responsible country that you got to deal with. And I think that's what we are advocating, that we can demonstrate that you can build a responsible country that deal with the mixed energy in the pragmatic manner by reducing the carbon footprint, by minimizing environmental impact, by zero drilling discharge or other factors, following that protocol and delivering good return. And I think that's what investors are looking for. But I also remember that the investors got to stay within the law. Therefore, as soon as sanctions are lifted in Venezuela, I'm very optimistic. And everybody says, Ali, you're very optimistic about Venezuela. I think my optimism is reality. If you look at it as a businessman that I've been in the oil sector for 40 years, I do see the opportunity that we be able to get to the point that meet everybody's requirement, including investors.
Ok, la próxima pregunta en español, la fórmula Max. Dice, en la conferencia del ingeniero Coronel, dijo que posiblemente el petróleo de la faja se quede allí. De acuerdo a su presentación sobre la transición a energías limpias, ¿está usted de acuerdo?
Juan, you want to translate that?
Yes, we had a presentation Ali a few weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago with Gustavo Coronel, and based on his vision of the future of the transition, he said that most of the resources of the Orinoco Belt will be left in place and not be able to produce. And the question is whether you agree with that assessment.
I disagree with him. I totally disagree with him. I think, as I pointed out, it's not my opinion, it's the fact. The capacity that is there, it would be, the resources would be monetized. Now, the question is, are you going to monetize it in 10 years, 15 years, or 50 years? As I pointed out in my presentation, we really shouldn't worry about the resources. We should work our way backward. What is the requirement for economic growth of Venezuela, and what should be the production? We believe at the steady state of 2.5 million barrels a day, you saw the GDP of Venezuela. That's sufficient enough. Would that continue for beyond 2050? Absolutely. Coal never disappeared. Many people predicted that many decades ago, coal production going to go to zero. We're still producing coal. Therefore, I believe that's going to be there. The advantage that Venezuela has, as I pointed out, and I work in Faja oil can be used for multi-products. Refiners like it. They don't like light oil. They like oil that you'll be able to create a multi-products. But again, it requires technology, how you make it to the synthetic. Therefore, I disagree with him. I think it's a negative advertisement, because in the short term, mid-term, and long term, we're going to depend on Faja. I pointed out with just the Faja project that is current, and the future, we should be able to produce 2.5 million barrels a day.
Okay, the next question. If sanctions were ended during Maduro regime, will your funds start to be invested in Venezuela at that point in time?
Our investment, or anybody investment, is non-political. Whoever, whether or not us or others coming to Venezuela, is for Venezuelans. And it got to be, it's outside the political. Politics got to be decided by Venezuela, not by outsiders. not by investors and so forth. Therefore, as soon as sanctions lifted, I think investors going to look at the Venezuela, and I believe that investment will return.
Okay. Next question. Dear Mr. Moshiri, we thank you for your excellent presentation. The current law requires PDVSA, a state company, to participate in all projects as the majority partner, higher than 50%. Do you consider we need to review, update these laws? What should be the role of the government and PDVSA for the optimal development of the upcoming oil and gas industry in Venezuela? Thank you.
A great question. We've been working on this, and there is different opinions, and all of them are right, but we've got to come to the consensus. My personal view is Venezuela got a hydrocarbon law that create a framework that need to be modified, not necessarily changed. The modification got to come through fiscal terms. Reduce the royalty, reduce the corporate tax, get rid of all other tax, allow each JV partner to lift their own oil or their own product. It's really all that's needed. We test that with the market. The rest of it is in place. My biggest concern is that if you're trying to rewrite hydrocarbon law, it would put significant doubt in the investor's mind that it's going to take a long time. It's going to be some uncertainty. If you reduce the royalty, reduce corporate tax, get rid of all other taxes, windfall profit tax, it would put Venezuela in very competitive position to investors to invest in Venezuela. I really think that's the only factor that need to be done. You might want to take a look at this in the future, want to rewrite the energy, petroleum law, but at the beginning, that country need the economy growth and need to the development and increase the production. You don't want to slow it down by bureaucratic, completely rewriting the hydrocarbon law. Send a positive message right now, today. These are the factors that we're going to reduce. And when the sanction is lifted, they would come. And like I said, when I said they, we would be one of the first to walk in and be able to implement our strategy and our plan. The 60% is irrelevant. The 60% doesn't mean anything other than you've got the largest equity. The question is who's going to be the operator, whether or not the JV operator should be restructured. For example, one of the things that in the past has been a tremendous obstacle in Empresa Mixta was the board of director combination. That majority was PDVSA, minority was the partner. Well, that really gives the control to PDVSA. That needs to be looked at, need to be revised, and it can be 2 and 2 and independent that will bring a more unbiased into it. Therefore, I think we can work within the law. We can easily change it to make it attractive to the investors.
Thank you. Next question. Thank you for your presentation on oil and gas global vision and focus on Venezuela. From the financial perspective, what IRR are investors expecting on Venezuela investment?
Would you repeat the question again?
From the financial perspective, what IRR are investors expecting on Venezuela investment?
Internal rate of return.
Oh,
IRR.
Oh, IRR. In the internal rate of return. With their expectation is got to be competitive. It really needs to be competitive. The problem we got today, the rate of return on the projects are pretty high. I mean, that if you look at most of the threshold for company to get a project to the final investment decision are 20% or above. But when you look at the equity, that means the stock, you look at the private capital return on the investment has been pretty low, very bad. And actually, that is one of the reasons the investors are not putting more money into the oil and gas sector, because we went through a very low oil prices environment. It's coming back up. To answer your question, the expectation is it has to be competitive. It got to be able to fundamentally be somewhere above 20%. That's basically the target you're looking at. Now, you can reach that 20% at the different oil prices. It's very difficult to get to 20% at 40. It's very easy to get at 90. The price that usually they run, and they're looking at these investors or something like that, in today's environment is $50. That's the reason I show the economy of Venezuela based on the $50 oil price.
Okay, I think it's been a very good presentation and a fairly long question and answers. We have numerous questions that we'll send to you for you to be so kind of answering the people. We had a very good turnout. Ali, we had over 95 people at one time, with a great cross section of the Venezuelan oil industry. We had all the students present, and we also had people that you know from long time ago, and from your presence in Venezuela. So we want to thank you. I do wanted to tell you that, of course, we coincide in a lot of things. I do think that the law is not as useful as you think. I think that because of the dire situation, the financial situation where PDVSA is at the time, it would not be able to afford its share of investment. So probably it's a good idea if the law, either the new law or a modified law, liberalizes the 50% or more than 50% and allows companies to actually take charge of their own destiny.
Juan, you're absolutely right. One of the things that it could be considered, it wasn't part of our discussion, is if you look at it, actually just in present mixer, they have 60%. But there are a lot of fields in Venezuela that is 100% PDVSA, and they need to dilute that equity.
Yeah.
They need to raise money. Therefore, 60% is JV, which is it's good part of it, but not all of it. But I think, to build based on your correct comment, by the way, they can afford pay 100% of the capital investment, reactivate some of those fields. It has to be diluted. What level it be diluted, it really, I'll leave it up to the Venezuelan government and Venezuelan people to decide. But your point is very valid. But our starting point is to start with the things that you own 100% and work your way up.
That's correct. Okay, well, thank you very, very much. And thanks. Bueno, muchas gracias a todos los que asistieron. Muchas gracias, Ali. Para los estudiantes, si quedaron con alguna duda, por favor, contactarme y vamos a tener una sesión media hora, una hora para hablar de las preguntas y de los comentarios que tuvo el señor Moshiri. Muchas gracias a todos. Y los esperamos el viernes que viene en la próxima conferencia. Gracias, María Estela y a B.S.
Gracias a todos. Feliz tarde.
Gracias.
Chao.